Hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I am so pleased you have joined me for today's show, location specific episode all about Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In all of my location specific episodes, I have included hyperlinks to the state, province, lord, landlord, tenant code, whatever it might be. In this case, Massachusetts landlord tenant rights. And in each of my location specific podcasts, I answer the same four questions, all the while maintaining my bingo card. My four questions that I go through are: what are the basics of the tenancy laws, in this case in Massachusetts? Then the second one is: what are the nuances of that location? The third: what about abandoned property left behind by a tenant in that location? And then the fourth thing we look for is always: how can you get help in that location, in this case, Massachusetts? Now, I've done so many of these location specific episodes that I have developed a standard list of items that I see most often in tenancy laws in different locations all over the world. And I call it my bingo card. At the very end of this episode, you will see that I am going to go through the bingo card just as a summary, but also to make sure that we didn't miss anything. And because as we go through some of the hyperlinks, sometimes we can miss things. That's okay because we'll pick it all up. But I must tell you that even with the hyperlinks in the show notes that we're going to go through screen sharing, you must do your own due diligence. Even if I get everything 1,000% right at the time of recording, things can and will change even 5 minutes later. So you must do your own research for the tenancy specific items in your area. But along the way, I am going to give you some running start for help on making sure that you can get it right, even as things change. Okay, here we go. I am going to screen share. So if you are watching this on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, that is the best thing because you're going to see me go through all the hyperlinks that are in the show notes. And if we find a gooder along the way, then I will add it. Okay, so the first one is the Massachusetts legislature. Uh, so it's the 194th General Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but this is the legislature website, Chapter 186, which is the landlord tenant rights. And this is a this a law. And so this one is a little bit, it's legalese. Why? Because yeah, it's a law. So this one, it's just going through general laws. In fact, I'm just going to go back to chapter 186 and just scroll down because this one, recovery possession after terminancy of tenancy at will, residential real estate, lease payments based on real estate tax increases, rental agreements restricting occupancy of children. Click on that one. Any provision of a lease or other rental agreement relating to real property whereby a leasee or tenant enters into a covenant agreement by contract by the use of any words whatsoever, the effect is to terminate or to provide the leaseor or landlord may terminate such lease or agreement if the tenant has or shall have child or children who shall occupy the premises covered by such lease or agreement shall be deemed against public policy and void. Yeah, because that's discrimination. You can't do that. So that's fair housing. So that makes sense. As you go all the way through here, there are 31 sections. And inspection of vacated property for presence of abandoned animals. Okay, let's go through that one. Oh, there's a bunch of stuff in here. So you want to make sure this is not very user friendly and as its current state, but it's here. I wanted to always include the law part of it if I can. But let's go to the next hyperlink because that's a lot more user friendly than just scrolling through each one. So this one is the Attorney General of Massachusetts, Office of the Attorney General, General's Guide to Landlord and Tenant Rights. And there's a bunch of things in here. So landlord tenant guide, working with a broker or real estate salesperson, terms of rental agreement, payments at start of tenancy, state sanitary code, eviction, and discrimination, which of course is against the law. But let's go into, let's see, do I have this one? So the tenant handbook is coming up, but let's do this one. Let me open this one in a new right. Guide to landlord and tenant rights. And I thought I had this one in the show notes, but I didn't. So I'm going to add this one. Guide to Lennon. No, I do have that one. It's in the next one. Oh, that's the link. You know what? That's the link to the website. I'm going to change that link, edit the link, and I'm going to put it in. There we go. Okay. So Attorney General's Guide to Landlord and Tenant Rights. This is 29 pages and November, dated November 2025. And it's a letter from the Attorney General. Cool little letter. Like it. This guide is for both audiences, tenants and landlords. I like it. Okay, table of contents, 10 things to know before you rent, the tenant laws in Massachusetts, and some of the hyperlinks that I've already mentioned on the website. Okay. This guide also does not cover eligibility for housing subsidy programs, so you want to make sure you've got it. And then, of course, this is new. They've got QR codes. I haven't normally seen that, but if you want to scan with your smartphone, you can. Okay, 10 things to know before you rent. Some of these are on the bingo card, so we're going to include that. Is there an application fee or fee to hold the unit? There shouldn't be. Under Massachusetts law, a landlord may never charge a tenant or prospective tenant an application fee or require a deposit to hold, reserve, or take an apartment off the market. There's a couple more in here. You have to be very specific over who's paying for what in the lease regarding utilities. A tenant cannot be required to pay for gas or electricity unless they're separately metered and the gas or electricity serves only the tenant's unit, including a light in the hallway or stairwell adjacent to the tenant's unit in certain circumstances. A tenant cannot be required to pay for heating oil unless there is a separate tank that only serves the tenant's unit. Otherwise, it's got to be included. Hmm. And when considering where to rent, tenants should ask about the historical costs of heating the unit to better understand. We always look at people ask, what should they budget? They can call the utility company because the utility company is going to know a lot better than I will for that unit, right? Does the rent cover water and sewer charges? Landlord may not charge or allow a tenant to be charged for water and sewage usage unless the requirements of the water submetering law are met. Okay. Are repairs needed to the unit? It's the landlord's responsibility to ensure that a dwelling unit be rented in a safe and habitable condition that complies with the state sanitary code. Okay, so and if there is something that needs to be put in, that needs to be repaired, the description of the repairs and expected date by which the landlord agrees should be put in writing. What appliances are included with the unit? The lease or rental agreement should note if major repairs are included with the tenancy, such as refrigerator, stove, washing machine, etc. Landlords are required to provide a cooktop, oven, and refrigerator unless the tenant agrees in writing to provide these appliances as part of the rental agreement. Notice, landlords have to provide cooktop, oven, and refrigerator, but not a dishwasher or laundry. That's important. Who is responsible for clearing snow and ice, which is a problem in Massachusetts, not so much in Hawaii, but snow and ice. The state sanitary code makes it the landlord's responsibility to clear snow and ice from the common areas of a multi-unit property, but a tenant may be responsible for removing snow and ice from areas under their exclusive control if a written rental agreement clearly identifies the tenant's responsibility for clearing snow. So you want to make sure if you are a Massachusetts landlord that if you've got tenants that have like a private walkway or a driveway, things like that, that they are in charge of the snow removal. Are pets allowed? A rental agreement may restrict the ability of a tenant to own a pet or may restrict the type, size, or number of pets allowed. Landlords may charge higher rent to tenants with pets, so they can have pet rent, or higher units for the units that allow pets. However, the total monthly rent, including these charges, must be clearly and conspicuously disclosed when the unit is advertised. Landlords may not charge a one-time pet fee to tenants with pets. And here's a huge thing. Assistance animals are not pets. Service animals and other animals that do work perform tasks, provide assurance, provide therapeutic emotional support for individuals. Landlords must not discriminate tenants with disabilities that use assistant animals. This is a white hot topic because there's always a question of emotional support animals versus a service animal versus a pet. And there's tons of episodes in the library about this topic. And actually, I am about to interview a amazing expert who specializes in emotional support animals on the US side. So this is pretty interesting. Okay. Who will live in the unit? Rental agreement should make clear who has the right to live in the unit. If a tenant is planning to have roommates, the landlord may require them to sign the rental agreement, and if they don't, they might be considered guests. Some rental agreements set restrictions on the number of guests allowed to visit at one time or specify how long guests are allowed to stay. Tenants are advised to check their lease carefully before adding a roommate to an existing lease. A landlord cannot refuse to rent to tenants because they have children or are pregnant. That's correct. Tenants should carefully consider how rental agreement may limit their ability to add or change occupants. A rental agreement may limit a tenant's ability to assign the lease or sublet the unit. Even where an assignment or a sublet isn't allowed, the original tenant in a sublet or assignment remains responsible for all the terms of the lease, including their obligations to keep the unit in good condition and pay the rent. Masslegalhelp.org is a website that will help in all of this. More information about subletting and including a sample subtenant agreement can be found at masslegalhelp.org, which I've got in the show notes as well. Is a pre-rental inspection or rental registration required? Landlords are encouraged to check their own city or town to see if a pre-rental inspection or rental registration is required. Many cities and towns require a pre-rental inspection for items such as smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. Some cities and towns, including the city of Boston, require landlords to register rental units within the city. Got information in here about working with a real estate broker. Tenant screening. I just did a whole series about tenant screening. So there's a six episode series about all of this. And the first thing in here is sealed eviction records. In 2024, Massachusetts enacted a new law that allows residential tenants to petition the court to seal an eviction record. The law prohibits consumer reporting agencies from disclosing the existence of a sealed eviction record or including a sealed eviction record in calculating any score recommendation to determine eligibility for housing or credit. Any application for housing or credit in Massachusetts that asks prospective tenants about past evictions must include the following notice. And so it says so this is what it has to say. An applicant for housing or credit with a sealed record on file with the court pursuant to section of 16, chapter 239 of the general laws may answer no record to an inquiry relative to that sealed court record, meaning they basically wiped it away. Interesting. Tenants and advocates are encouraged to report any applications for housing or credit that ask about prior evictions but fail to include this notice. You email the Attorney General's office, and then there's a question, a QR code about how to seal an eviction. That just seems a little bit sketchy to me, but I guess this is an issue in Massachusetts. Sealing an eviction. Unlawful income, credit, or employment restrictions. This is still about tenant screening in Massachusetts. Landlord may not require prospective tenants to have a particular type of income, such as income from a job, or impose minimum rent to income ratios where these requirements have the purpose or effect of excluding or disadvantaging people with housing subsidy or receiving public assistance. So you've fair housing requirements known as anti-discrimination prohibit discrimination against people who receive federal, state, or local public assistance and housing subsidies. I have plenty of tenants who have some sort of assistance on both sides of the border, actually, which is it's not a problem, actually. It's actually really great that people understand how to use the government programs to their advantage. Okay, so following are examples of discriminatory language in advertising for housing. Proof of employment required, not Section 8 certified, must have minimum annual income of $65,000. Good credit references, employment and income history needed, or must have strong credit and verifiable employment to be considered. I have seen every single one of these. Yep, got to be careful. That's all discriminatory. You can't do that. Criminal record information. So before we were talking about evictions, sealing evictions, but now let's talk about criminal records. And this is just in Massachusetts. Although housing providers may in some cases refuse to rent to people with criminal records, a blanket rule that excludes all prospective tenants with a criminal historic record may violate state and federal civil rights laws because using criminal records in this way can have a disproportionate effect on protected groups such that it may result in unlawful discriminatory impact. If a landlord wishes to use criminal history record to evaluate an applicant for housing, they should conduct an individual assessment of the applicant's criminal history. Any such individual assessment must not discriminate against applicants on the basis of race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender, marital status, religion, age, sexual orientation, source of income, gender identity or expression, or military background, or because the person is disabled. So it's basically any protected class according to fair housing, which makes sense. Okay. One other thing, landlords must also comply with the requirements of the Criminal Offender Record of Information before denying housing based on this criminal history report. A landlord must notify the applicant for the reason of the denial, provide a copy of the screening report and the landlord screening policy. So make sure that if you're going to do it this way, which I do, you need to make sure that you are clear on what your policy is. And then it talks about credit, Fair Credit Reporting Act. If you're using credit as a part of your tenant screening, which is not a bad thing, if you're going to deny based on credit, you have to give them a copy of the credit report, right? Yeah. The terms of tenancy based on a lease, based on tenancy at will, which is basic month to month, lease negotiations, terms of a rental agreement, mm, payments at the start of a tenancy. A landlord may only ask a tenant for the following upfront payments: first month's rent, security deposit to cover the cost of any damage to the apartment beyond normal wear and tear, which may not exceed 1 month's rent, last month's rent, and the actual cost of a new lock and key for the apartment. Now, I'm sorry, if your unit is say $2,000, first month's rent is 2,000, security deposit is another month's rent, which is another 2,000, and then last month's rent, which is $6,000 plus the actual cost of a new lock and key for the apartment. 6 grand. Cough it up. Wow. My goodness. But that's what you do. And I've not seen first and last and security deposit in a long time. Typically, we just see first and security deposit, but not last month's. Landlords may not charge tenants or prospective tenants upfront pet fees, broker fees, or application fees at the start of a tenancy. Okay, laws governing the security deposit. All security deposits must be deposited in a Massachusetts bank in an account that collects interest and within the first month of tenancy. So you got to get it into the right spot in the first month of tenancy. The deposit must be kept separate from the landlord's money in an account that is protected from the landlord's creditors. So you've got to have it in a separate account. The landlord must provide the tenant with the name and address of the bank holding the security deposit plus the actual account number. Each year, the landlord must either pay the tenant interest on the security deposit or let the tenant deduct that amount from a rent payment. So either one. Landlords should give a tenant a statement of condition within 10 days, which is a move-in inspection, condition move-in inspection within 10 days of the beginning of the tenancy, or receipt of the security deposit, whichever is later, which describes the condition of the apartment and any damage that exists at that time. And then the tenant has 15 days to add the statement of condition or make changes to it. Both parties should keep copies on final of the final statement of condition. So basically, they're saying landlord start it, tenant can finish it, but at the end of the day, it has to get done. And so I like to do them together. We actually do walkthroughs together at the start and at the end, and it just makes it super easy. If you do it together and then everybody signs, that's the way it is. Super easy. Uh, okay, when the tenancy ends, the landlord must return the security deposit plus interest within 30 days. However, the landlord may keep any unpaid rent or the amount of money needed to repair damage done to the apartment beyond normal wear and tear. If the lease provides for it, the landlord may also deduct the tenant's share of any increase in the landlord's property taxes. Interesting. If the landlord intends to keep all or part of the security deposit for damage, then the landlord must give the tenant a written description of the damage and an estimate of repair costs within 30 days of the tenant moving out. Okay, laws governing that last month's rent. If a tenant provides the landlord with last month's rent at the commencement of the tenancy, then the landlord must give the tenant a signed receipt. Like all receipts in the tenancy process, the receipt must include the amount paid, date of payment, what it was, landlord's name, tenant's name, and the name of the person whom the payment was given to. And at the end of each year, when the tenancy ends, the tenant is entitled to any interest earned on the last month's rent as well. Okay. So it talks about the sanitary code, condition of the apartment. There's QR codes all through this, which is really interesting. Health of the home. This is talking about mold and compliance with environmental and public health laws. Eviction, mediation. There's a bunch of resources about mediation here. Lawyer of the Day programs can be found at mass.gov. Eviction process, it talks about how to do the eviction, and again, there's QR codes throughout this. Special types of housing, including rooming housing, manufactured slash mobile homes, retaliation, landlord retaliation. It does define what landlord retaliation is, and it's illegal for landlords to threaten or take reprisals against tenants or occupants. Protected activity includes, but is not limited to, reporting conditions to the landlord or property manager, reporting conditions to the local board of health, filing a complaint in court or with an administrative agency, or organizing or joining a tenants union. And retaliation can take many forms, but the followings are example of conduct that would be illegal or threatened if taken against the tenant or occupant of the property engaging in it. Oh, there's lots. There's more than I normally see. Okay, so a landlord is considered retaliating if they raise the rent, terminate or fail to renew a lease, change the locks, shut off the heat or electricity, start an eviction proceeding, report a tenant to the police or immigration officials, because as of the time of this reporting, the fear of ICE agents removing illegal immigrants is alive and well in the United States. And finally, you cannot harass a tenant or occupant of the property. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion in the real estate world and landlording world about illegal immigration and ICE agents. And so if that is part of retaliation right now, that's very real. Additional resources from the Attorney General's Office, Landlord Tenant Consumer Protection Regulations, QR code for that, Advisor on Broker Fees, QR code for that, Guidance on Unfair and Deceptive Junk Fees, Guidance on Preventing Housing Discrimination Based on Source of Income, Health at Home, Guide to Manufacturing Housing Community Law, File a consumer complaint, file a civil rights complaint. And there's just a ton of resources from other state agencies. There's not only a QR code, but these ones actually all have locations and phone numbers as well. And so this is Massachusetts Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, Massachusetts Housing Court, Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, Massachusetts Department of Health Program, Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program, and Trial Court Library. Also, you've got resources provided by legal organizations, including Mass Law Help, which we'd already talked about, Massachusetts Defense for Eviction, which the acronym is MADE, M-A-D-E, and that's a website of Greater Boston Legal Services. Up2code.org is a free online tool that helps Massachusetts tenants solve problems with bad conditions in their home. And then there's a whole whack of resources. This is probably one of the more succinct, concise explanations, and then either hyperlinks or QR codes. This is actually really well done because it's only 29 pages, and it's really, if you want to go down a rabbit hole and know more, then just scan the code or click the hyperlink. That's pretty cool. That's actually really cool. Okay, let's go to the next hyperlink. This is the Massachusetts Tenants Handbook. But this one, I'm actually kind of shocked that it's so big, 198 pages. Wow. Again, another QR code prepared by tenant-rights.com. And if it really walks, this is tenant centric, of course. And so this is before you agree to rent, living in the unit, dealing with problems, a tenant's death. You know, I like death on this show because it is a part of life and an inevitability as a landlord. You will have some kind of dealing with death in some way. Okay, so this is what it says. I'm on page 149, tenant's death. If a tenant dies, both landlords and family members need a clear, calm plan to protect rights, secure the unit, and handle any property and money. This section explains immediate steps, official forms you may need, and practical examples of so landlords, executors, and relatives know what to do under the Massachusetts procedure and federal fair housing protections. When it has a bit of a checklist. Action steps for landlords after a tenant's death. Caution, respond to legal notices and court deadlines promptly. Yeah. Inventory checklist. Okay, so this looks like it is moving out of a... Okay, so that's the condition inspection, termination. I'm going to go back to the I'm going to go back to the table of contents because that was easier to jump to. Let's look for some abandoned properties. Rent increase. Let's do rent limits to rent increase, local stabilization. Is that let's see, rent increases. Let's do that. Okay. Massachusetts landlord may raise rent when a fixed term lease ends or for a tenancy at will with proper advance notice. A lease cannot be changed midterm unless it allows for an increase. But for a month-to-month tenant, notice equal to the rental period, commonly 30 days or 1 month, is generally required. I like how it has these little check boxes. This is kind of cool. So ask for written notice and check your lease renewal date. Keep receipts and simple rent payment log. If you suspect illegal or retaliatory increases, contact housing court or legal aid. Keep rent increase notices and receipts together. And then there's hyperlinks in here. Summary process complaint. Tenants use the court form to file an answer or request a hearing, or notice to quit terminate tenancy form used to start a notice period. Keep a dated copy and consult housing court resources. Example of a rent increase. A clear example helps explain how rent increases work in Massachusetts. If you have a fixed term lease, for example, 12 months, which is pretty standard, the landlord generally cannot raise your rent until the lease term ends unless your lease specifically allows for an increase during the term. For month-to-month or other periodic tenancy, landlord must give proper notice before the new rent takes effect. Check your lease and timing of the notice. Okay, document any rent increase in response in writing. Here's the steps. Steps you can take when you receive a rent increase notice. Compare the new amount of your lease and the note of the date the increase is to start. Check the notice period in your lease for your tenancy type and court. Count the calendar days before the increase takes effect because you've got to make sure you've been given proper notice. Ask for a written amendment or negotiate a phased increase if the jump is large, because that's one thing you're not seeing is how much can the rent be increased. Ask for a written amendment or negotiate a phased, and yeah, we talked about that. Keep copies of the notice, emails, receipts, and any replies as evidence of what was offered and when. And if the landlord threatens eviction for refusing to pay a disputed increase, review Massachusetts summary process rules and get legal advice promptly. If you choose to move out because the increase is unaffordable, give the required written notice and document your move out date. Okay, court forms and filing form. Visit the Massachusetts trial court forms, which I'm going to open in a new tab because I want to see what is there. Oh, it says no. Hyperlink is broken. Okay, entry into a unit. I'm going to scroll down here. This is actually really detailed. My goodness, whoever did this was super OCD. Landlord's responsibility for repairs, tenant's responsibility for repairs, conditions that make a rental unit legally uninhabitable, especially in Massachusetts. I'm sure heat and temperatures in here and mold, right? Okay, I'm going to go back up to the table of contents because that's way easier than trying to scroll through. Okay, list of cities with rent control ordinances as of 2024. All right. Okay, so Appendix 2, list of cities with rent control ordinances as of 2024. The list is empty. Massachusetts does not have any active municipal rent control ordinances in effect. Landlords remain free to set rents subject to lease terms, local zoning, building codes, and federal state non-discrimination law. But there is no state authorized local rent control program in force that freezes or caps rent across a city. Interesting. Okay. So that appendix is empty. Tenant information and assistance resources. Just scrolling down here. And then other resources. There's just a ton of hyperlinks all through this. And guidance, which actually is really cool. Legally required text of notices. Oh, legally required text and common official forms in Massachusetts. Okay. Massachusetts trial court forms. I think this is the one I just opened and it didn't work. Let's see. Nope, it didn't work. It's still broken. Lead warning statement. Rent cap and Statement of cause to terminate tenancy. All right. Wow, there is a lot to this document. No wonder it's 200 pages long. Wow. Okay, there's a lot of things in this. Let's go to the next hyperlinks and then we'll pick anything up in the bingo card. Okay, let's talk about abandoned property. This one I got from Massachusetts Landlord .net, masslandlords.net. This one was talking about abandoned property. So sometimes tenants leave things behind. Sometimes these things look valuable. Sometimes they leave entire apartments behind. What can a landlord do with abandoned property? The key issue is whether you have documentation about their ending their residency, like they no longer live there. Even with a lease, you must be sure they do not intend to reside there. Without such documentation, you must follow the abandoned property process. If you have documentation, suppose that they communicated that they were leaving, left you their keys, sent you a final text saying they've left. In this case, you can dispose of any remnants of trash, deduct from the security deposit for the out-of-pocket cost of disposal. Anything that looks valuable might be stored in a basement to be nice. In case they come back, save all email screenshots of their texts and organize all your evidence. If they come back to sue, you can remind them that they told you that they were gone. However, suppose they disappeared without saying anything. There may or may not be keys left in the apartment. In that case, you have no proof that they're gone forever. Even if the apartment is mostly empty, you haven't heard them tell you that they are gone. They might have spare keys. They might intend to return. You must follow the abandoned property process, which is one, issue the disappeared tenant notice to quit, mail it to their rental address. Okay. Two, talk with other tenants and likely neighbors. Look for piled up mail, smell for an odor. Any evidence that they have left should be documented before you enter. You can also talk with the letter carrier because if they're getting other mail from other things like a prison, maybe that's why they're abandoned. Who knows? Three, enter the apartment. A constable is not required. If there is nothing left, the apartment is abandoned. If there is anything left at all, write another letter to their rental address that states, based on the following observations, I have determined that you have abandoned your apartment. And if I have not heard from you in 7 days, I will assume it's abandoned, right? Four, take pictures of everything left behind. And if you're not comfortable taking pictures, bring a constable back to the apartment for you. They'll document it for you. Okay, five, go to court in the normal eviction process to get an execution. This should be quickly because the tenant is not there to resist and likely is any notices are getting mailed right back to the apartment. So make sure you file all paperwork as soon as you can. And then six, with the execution, constable and bonded moving company move the remaining items to storage, pay the movers as per law. And seven, the apartment is now yours. You can now re-rent the unit, turn the unit, advertise, etc. If you have some communication indicating that they were ending their tenancy, you might be able to make do with just step three. When in doubt, follow the full abandonment process. It will let you dispose of any items of value and still be found faultless under Massachusetts law. Interesting. Okay, so it's not saying that you have to store everything for a period of time. Interesting. Okay, cool. Let's go to the next one. This one is eviction legal services and mediation. This is mass.gov. And so it's the official website of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So offered by Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. And there is 5 different drop-down menus, including a bunch of frequently asked questions about finding legal help. There's hyperlinks on all of it. So find legal help statewide. Let's open that in a new link. Do you have legal problem in Massachusetts? Let's say yes. What legal problem are you facing? Mischief and rental. That may not work, but we'll see. No response. Okay. I call it mischief, but you can also pick from a topic from the list. Housing and homelessness. Let's just go there. My landlord is evicting me. I have a different problem. I'm homeless looking for I'm a landlord. Okay, let's go to that. Which of these? I have tenants who I need to evict, or I want more information about my rights and responsibilities. There it is. Then they talk about how many people live in your household and household's monthly income before taxes. Okay, so you're going to go through this and they're going to help you figure out which resource is best for you. Okay, talks about legal aid, information for eviction of tenants, information about eviction for landlords. Mediation is quickly becoming a requirement before you actually go before the court. You have to have at least tried mediation. And in a lot of places, it looks like that's an option in Massachusetts. It's no indication that it's required, but a lot of places are going there. Okay, and then there's some additional resources as we go through here. Okay. Okay, this one is masslegalhelp.org. We've already talked about this website a couple times, legal problems in Massachusetts. You just put in your, here it is, housing, apartments and shelter, right? And you go from there. And actually, if you scroll all the way down, typically use this chat with a law librarian, find a lawyer, online legal advice. There's help all over the place in this. Contact us, and then you can submit a form. Yeah. Okay. We've already talked about this one already, masslandlords.net for landlord and property managers and investors of all size. This is a nonprofit for owners and managers of Massachusetts residential real estate. So this is a group that you might want to join or at least follow, right? May 29th. So this is 2 days ago. Wow. This is 3 days ago. There's articles all over here, and there's a bunch within like the last week. This is pretty cool. Good handyman, rent control in Massachusetts, landlord basics, eviction process. It talks about how to do this. Very cool. Tenant screening, credit screening discount, videos on demand. Boy, there's just a lot. Okay. Need a hand, spot, and error. So it looks like you've got a chat bot down here that if you are completely lost, you can start there. Events, about events and training. Meeting schedules. Oh, there's different locations. Okay. Massachusetts isn't a very big place. And so if you find a place or a event in Massachusetts that is like a meetup or something, I would go. Like, goodness, it's not that far unless it's snowing. That's different. Full day training, cash crash course. Okay, cool. And potentially directory. I don't know if you join this one or what, but very cool. You got Stefan from Boston and Jane from Worcester. The cheapest way to learn is from someone else's mistakes. Okay, that like sums up my whole podcast here. That's pretty cool. Okay, two more hyperlinks and then we'll wrap it up. Mass Union of Public Housing Tenants. This is massunion.org. Again, I typically will monitor other like tenant locations, like I'm a part of the Maui Tenants Association Facebook page, only because if something's going on or there's a discussion going on, it'll pop up in my feed, which I can see what's going on. That's why I include the tenants aspect of this as well for you. Okay, and then this one is masslawhelp.com. This is typically if you need legal help, then you can contact them. 3 ways to contact: self-referral, or you can phone them. And then there's frequently asked questions. Dial a lawyer, free legal advice, monthly dial a lawyer program. Okay, there you have it. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go through the bingo card and then we will wrap it up. Okay. Let's start off with tenant application fee. Landlords may not charge tenants or prospective tenants upfront application fees at the start of a tenancy. Broker's fees must be paid by the party who hired the broker, meaning landlords cannot pass on broker fees to tenants if the landlord hired the broker. We didn't talk about that, but that's what it says. But if the tenant went, then the tenant's got to pay for the broker. But typically, I've seen that it's the landlord that pays for the broker, but whoever's hiring the broker pays the fee. Okay, grace period. A landlord cannot impose any interest or penalty for failure to pay rent until 30 days after rent shall have been due. 30 days. So this may be one of the reasons why last rent, so you've got first month's rent, security deposit, and last month's rent, because there is no grace period. 30 days. Wow, that is a very long time. Ugh. Is there a late fee amount, a percentage, or a flat fee, or a maximum fee for a late fee amount. Massachusetts law does not specify a maximum late fee amount, but it cannot be charged until rent is 30 days late. Oh, gosh. Some sources suggest that a reasonable late fee should not exceed between 4 and 5% of the rent. Okay, security deposit must be deposited. We've gone through that. It's got to be in a Massachusetts interest-bearing account, and then you have to share the interest with the tenant or allow them to deduct once a year. Lease wording and details. Every rental agreement must set forth the name, address, phone number of the owner, the person responsible for maintenance, the person whom a tenant can give copies of formal notice, complaints, court papers, and it cannot include illegal terms, and it can't do anything regarding landlord retaliation. Okay. Landlords may not charge tenants or prospective tenants upfront pet fees at the start of a tenancy, while a separate pet deposit is generally unlawful. Pet rent may be permissible if it is incorporated into the regular monthly rent and not an additional deposit. There are no fixed limits on pet rent, but it must be reasonable. Okay. Landlord must make sure that the tenant is given a legible copy of the lease or rental agreement, so the delivery of the signed lease is required. And what about a condition inspection at move-in? The landlord should give the tenant statement of condition within 10 days beginning the tenancy or upon the receipt of the security deposit, whichever is later. And the tenant has 15 days to add to the statement of condition or make changes of what the landlord said. But either way, they both need a copy of it. Standard warning letters or wording. Massachusetts law requires specific notice language for certain situations. For example, a notice to quit for non-payment of rent must be an accompanied form. Okay. How often can the rent be increased? Massachusetts has statewide prohibition on rent control. For tenancies at will, which is month to month, rent can be changed with notice, typically 30 days or 1 month before the next rent payment, whichever is longer. For leases, rent typically remains the same for the term of the lease. Of course, this is talking about a fixed lease. What is proper notice on a rent increase? For a tenancy at will, either the landlord or the tenant can decide to end tenancy or change the rent by giving the other party notice, either 30 days or 1 month before the due date of the next rent payment, whichever is longer. And how much can the rent be increased? We talked about no current rent control laws. Renter's insurance is not required in Massachusetts, but a landlord may require a tenant to obtain it, which would be included in the lease agreement. Abusive access defined. Yes, Massachusetts law defines landlord right to access. Landlord retaliation is definitely defined. It's actually one of the most comprehensive lists I've seen. If the lease, does the end of a fixed lease end abruptly? Like, do they have to end right then, or does it automatically convert to month to month? If a lease is for a fixed term, it typically ends abruptly on the specific date unless otherwise agreed upon. If the tenant remains in the property after the lease expired without a new agreement, it may convert to tenancy at will if the landlord accepts the rent. Okay. Is there an acceleration clause if there is early termination from the tenant? Massachusetts law does not explicitly prohibit acceleration clauses in residential leases, but their enforceability can be limited. Generally, a landlord has a duty to mitigate damages by attempting to re-rent the property if a tenant breaks the lease early. Okay. Condition inspection at move out. While a move-in statement of condition is required, Massachusetts law does not explicitly mandate a formal move-out inspection with the tenant present. However, if the landlord is going to keep any part of that security deposit, then a condition inspection at move out is pretty much required because you've got to justify it. When the tenancy ends, the landlord must return the security deposit plus interest within 30 days. And can you use the deposit as last month's rent? Yes or no? Well, they wouldn't use it as last month's rent because they've already collected last month's rent separately at the commencement of the tenancy. What's the penalty for not returning the deposit within 30 days? 3 times the amount of security deposit plus interest. Wow. How long can you give notice of eviction? Looks like 14 days. 30 days for a notice of eviction due to mischief. And abandoned items. We've talked about that. And the only thing in there, it talks about statewide prohibition on rent control one more time. Okay, well, that wraps it up for Massachusetts. Just as a reminder, The location specific podcasts I do are set up in the exact same way, answering the same four questions. What are the basics of the tenancy law in that location? What are the nuances of the tenancy laws in that location? What's some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant? And where do you get help in that location if you are a landlord? Along the way, you saw me keep track on my bingo card of standard items I see most often in tenancy laws in different locations worldwide, which helps as a summary for this location, in this case, Massachusetts. This is the same format for every location specific episode, so if you're interested in another geographic area, you know exactly the format, just change the location. But again, one more time, this episode is not all inclusive. You must research further and keep current on your specific area where your rentals are. You've got to do further research. So if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're either new to real estate or you want to be in real estate in Massachusetts. Thing you can do to help yourself, educate yourself on all the resources regarding Massachusetts landlord tenant law. Make sure you understand how this all works and ask questions. The second thing you can do is learn from other landlords, whether you get into a chat room, whether it's on social media or some kind of thing like Nextdoor. Make sure you're asking questions in electronic form. But if you want to meet other landlords in person, I gave you a couple of different options for associations, and there very likely are other meetup groups that you can also jump into and talk with other Massachusetts landlords. Learn from them. That's pretty good. I hope you enjoyed today's show all about Massachusetts. Don't forget to subscribe for more expert advice and real stories from across the rental property world. I'm recording this episode today from Maui, Hawaii. Why? Because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me next week for episode 240, where I interview an amazing Texas-based former engineer who reminds us to balance the numbers as well as the heart as a landlord. Derek Spinger joins me next week. I will see you there.